Welcome to Research Matters, an online show that is all about communicating the research taking place at NUST in efforts to promote the university's research agenda and the impact thereof.
Welcome back to Research and Innovation Matters with Nigel and Unda. It is episode 3, season 4. Now, of course, today we have such an amazing guest, the one that I love. Of course, we haven't seen each other in a long time, but we have the privilege to get into some chats today, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, of course, today on Research and Innovation Matters, we're joined by Professor Heike Winschiers-Theophilus, who is the UNESCO Chair in Digital Technology Design with Indigenous People, and she will join us to unpack Namibia's next frontier in digital inclusion, building a national language repository, of course, as well as training multilingual AI translation for under-resourced languages, and bridging indigenous languages into classrooms in a way that it is meaningful and respectful. Now, just to get into it, of course, welcome to Research Innovation. Thank you. Just to get into it, Prof, let's take a look at what digital technology design with Indigenous people means to an everyday person like myself.
Okay, so I know it's a very long title,
Yes.
but it focuses on the technology design with people rather than for people. And it's on the premises that technology design is influenced by whoever designs it and in which context it's designed.
Okay.
So the technology encompasses the value system of the designers and then influences societal behavior. So it's really important that local Namibians and indigenous people, minorities, participate in the design of the technology to change the underlying value and also influence where society goes. If we don't have local people involved, we keep on repeating foreign influences through the technology.
Yeah.
And then the whole society is shaped by that technology.
That's true.
And it's really important for Namibia that has a lot of diversity, a lot of really unique cultural identities to come forward inside of these technologies and to influence the rest of the world rather than being influenced the other way around.
Now, I was actually going to talk about having that uniqueness take charge, or having Namibians lead the type of look and feel that they would like in some of the technology. So I think that's a great initiative.
And so it's really for every Namibian. It's all the languages. It's that diversity. Every Namibian speaking at least 2, 3, 4 languages.
Yeah.
So even having these multiple languages within one app would make total sense.
And
I guess this then leads to co-designing of platforms. Now, what does that look like really on the ground? I mean, we're talking about different languages, and obviously that there are multiple people that are involved. That has to make sense within the Namibian context. How does co-designing take place, and what does it look like on the ground from first conversation to the working technology?
Yeah, so co-design is really fundamentally different from normal software engineering design. So in the old days, or the classical approach used to be the software designers interview the people, then they go back to their offices and design and then deliver at most the user tests it. So in the co-design, again, that builds on we need the values of the co-designers in the system, and that can only happen if they participate.
Thanks.
And so they would participate from step one, from the conceptualization of what is possible, what could we be designing, what shape should it take, where's the focus. And so why, for example, it's very interesting to work with indigenous minorities is because they have totally different focuses from our everyday.
Okay.
So they bring the technology aspects into another space of what is important, what should be represented, what should be designed in the first place. So then what happens is in the conceptualization phase, we look at what is possible, what resources do we have, what technologies do we have, what are the limitations of technologies. So do we use virtual reality, do we use augmented reality, or which technology can even fit the context?
Yes.
And so the communities, we have been working with communities for many years, they most of them are designers by now, not users.
Okay.
So they know what is possible.
All right.
And so then they can make decisions. So of course the users or the co-designers need to be at a certain level.
Okay.
But also we learn all the time. So that's the basis of co-design. It's everybody comes in with their skill set, and then as we design together, we learn from each other. So we learn about indigenous knowledge, they learn about technology, we put that all together and create the systems.
Just to take you a bit back, you say they are designers now.
Yes.
Please break that down for us. Like, are they now behind the computer?
Okay, so that's programmers.
Yes. Perfect.
So I take it a step back or a step up.
Yes.
Like designing is this understanding of what do we want to achieve. So we do the sketches. How should the interface look like? What features should it have? So that's the design stages. And then at this point, they are not part of the programming yet.
Okay.
So we design the scenes, the interfaces, those things. Then we come back. Usually we come back to Winto, and then we have a set of students, usually supervised by a lecturer, coding this, creating prototypes.
Okay.
And okay, it depends. So we also, if we have users that are in town, then they sit together with the coders.
Okay.
Okay.
But now it is physical separation. Because we need power, it's quite complicated.
You have to come back here.
To sit and code in the village. We have done it also, but so the power problems, send, whatever, So then we have the prototypes, we go back to the community, they look at the prototypes, they criticize the prototypes, they
Make
say,
improvements.
and then they say, please refine this, don't do this is scrap, we don't want to see this. So they do a whole validation on the prototypes, and we do multiple cycles. So some things we haven't resolved over years, some things we are able to solve immediately.
Okay. Now, perhaps we can look at the myths that exist within indigenous knowledge and technology. What would you say is one of the wildest myths that you've encountered or heard about, and how would you debunk that?
Yeah, I mean, the myth is always, and I mean, that's when I started with the indigenous knowledge and technology.
Yeah.
That the vice chancellor was then saying, but this has nothing to do with innovation. Why are you going backwards, or why do you think looking into the past will get you into innovation? So the biggest myth is really that they are at the opposite spectrum of each other in terms of development and innovation. And in real, they are close together. So they're actually so close together that with the use of indigenous knowledge and indigenous people, we can create innovations that we would not be able to create without them. Because the whole point of innovation is think outside of the box, right?
Yes.
But we are all in a box. We're all brainwashed. But they are not. So they have not been influenced by whatever blue underlined is a hyperlink. They don't know that a triangle is a drop-down menu. All these things they don't know. And because they are not in that space, they're able to bring fresh ideas that we would not be able to have without them. And then the other way around, technology also facilitates, of course, the dissemination of indigenous knowledge, new ways of representing indigenous knowledge and bridging gaps between the elders and the youth.
Now talking about distribution of indigenous knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong. I think part of your plans for 2026 is to develop a national digital repository for Namibia languages, a structured platform to collect and store and manage both text and speech data in various languages across the country. Maybe you can explain to us what is within this repository and who contributes to it.
Yeah,
I think it's a loaded question in its own. But maybe you can speak to us about the 2026 plans with regards to the digital repository for Namibian languages.
Yeah, so what we tried, we have been collecting indigenous knowledge before, but we have never really focused too much on the language. But now there's a necessity to focus on language, especially like with AI, ChatGPT, all these tools coming up, but also other needs that come with government services, etc. So we're focusing on the language, on collecting language data.
Okay.
And so the language data, we have different forms. So one, we are looking at translated pairs. So ideally we would have one word in one language and another one. So we store pairs. We store pairs of words, of phrases, of sentences, maybe of paragraphs, because the structures are also different. So normally you don't translate word by word from one language to the other. So then we also need to keep data on patterns of how is a sentence structured, how is a paragraph structured, how is a whole story structured. So we have that, then which we want to collect through crowdsourcing. So we are nearly done with the development of that. So Mr. Ndongo is leading this together with his students, and so they have developed that platform which will be deployed hopefully next month.
Okay.
And then any Namibian can contribute pairs of translations.
All right.
Like whatever, or Shivambo, English, or Afrikaans, whichever, it doesn't matter. Then we have, on that system, we identify language experts and language native speakers. So that would be maybe academics, but also from the communities. And they validate those translations.
Okay.
So we have that process on that system. Then another data set would be whatever is already out there. So we have stories, we have a bit of stuff out there, like, maybe some course material, maybe some, I don't know. So there's a lot of things out there. NBC has a lot, of course, from their radio station.
Yeah.
So there we have tons and tons if we would have access to it.
Yeah.
So of course we will ask for that, because that's very valuable data sets. True. Over years and years, they have the radio stories already out there.
Prof, could we, sorry,
Yeah.
perhaps you can finish your thought. I just wanted to follow up on Nigel's question actually, and look at this repository. Who owns it? What does that ownership look like for the language resources and the cultural knowledge that you collect and combine and so forth with that?
Who owns language? so I'm throwing it back at you, because I think this question of ownership is, yes, it keeps on popping up, because it keeps on coming from a deep thought of how can I make money out of this, right? So I want to own it. But okay, let's be serious. Language is not owned by anyone. It only becomes complicated if there's content.
Yes.
The language itself, you can have the A, I have the you get the word house. It's yours now.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it makes no sense,
It makes no
right?
sense, right?
So that question makes no sense. The issue is, of course, that language and content is intertwined. So now it becomes complicated, and that leads me to my third data set. If we have people just uploading, so now, for example, we have the youth engaged in recording indigenous practices, and they're translating it, they put subtitles, so they're actually doing a lot of work already. So now the question is private data. So I recorded my grandfather doing.
Yes.
So then there's a content question, but the language itself.
Yeah, most of the language
definitely doesn't-
resources
is
is
not
what
own-
you get out from those.
Yeah, and then I mean we just had a indigenous gathering last year with lots of indigenous people from all over the world.
Yeah.
So this concept of commercialization and this concept of economy and making money is very strange to them. So
Okay.
the terms that come up is like stewardship, custodianship. So you should rather ask, who's the custodian of it? Who makes sure that the data is used for the well-being of the earth and the people?
Yeah.
Rather than who's gonna steal it or who's gonna make money with it.
Yes.
Because that's always the drive, and that makes no sense in an endeavor like this.
Yeah.
It is for the well-being of the people and the planet at the end of the day. So we just need to, one, rethink But on the other hand, also make sure, of course, it doesn't get exploited, it doesn't get disformed, and
Yes.
yeah. So there is, of course, a whole set of technical issues that we need to think about.
Yeah.
And also privacy, commercialization, benefit, and
Yeah.
So, Prof, once we've collected all this information, run it through our systems, the AI is churning at the back there. Then what? Where do we use it? How do we use it?
I mean, there was always a purpose why we were doing it in the first place, right? So why do we need translation? So what we are looking at mostly in our project is AI translations.
Yes.
Of course, then you can use the data for other things.
Yes.
Whatever, deriving traditional practices, medicines, whatever. But okay, let's focus on the translation systems. Why do we need translation systems? Yes, we have a national language, but a lot of people are not fluent or they can't read. They can't read also their own languages. The indigenous minority languages are even more problematic. Nobody agreed on the spellings. So it actually doesn't exist as a text. And that's just another example of why Namibians should get engaged in the design, because the mainstream knowledge systems have focused too much on text.
Yeah.
While in the Namibian culture, there's much more oral.
Yeah.
So we should focus much more on the oral translations and oral speech output, and so there's a lot to be done, a lot of work. But so why, when we designed the draft national action plan for the indigenous decade, the decade of indigenous languages, all these long words. So we had stakeholder workshops, and what kept on popping up is one, health sector.
Yes.
So it keeps on coming up that indigenous minorities, they go to the clinic, they can't explain what the nurses don't understand. So the whole health treatment is affected by not having translation systems. And so it would be so beautiful, and I mean that has been a dream for many, many decades, to have this little device and you speak in your language, I hear you in my language and I respond, and so that has been around for very long.
Yeah.
So that was the first, in the 90s we were working on that already, when I was still in Europe, but it never materialized. So let's hope we can do it now for the Namibian languages. So that would be somehow the dream, to say, okay, we can now bridge that gap. So health is an important one. The legal system, of course, another important one. Land rights, whatever. How do you explain that in an indigenous language?
Yeah.
Education, obviously, is the other big one, because we have the language policy. So children have the right to be educated in their mother tongue.
Yes.
Yet there's no material, there's no teachers, it's not in the curriculum anchored properly. So that's where the next use would be. Because then we can, if we have the AI translation systems, we can just throw the whole curriculum in, get it translated, and have the material from one day to the other.
Please.
Besides that, we still need to have the indigenous knowledge, but we can translate what we have already.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you've actually tied into my next question, which was looking at integrating indigenous knowledge into our school curriculums. I actually wanted to know, how could you integrate this meaningfully so that it actually has the impact that you intend for it to have in this time we are being?
Because also again, so we have been thinking about it for very long. It was a policy in South Africa to integrate indigenous knowledge into the curricula, and the teachers never really knew how to do that. How does it fit? Where does it fit in the curriculum? And so what we have now discovered also, besides the content, so we have worked a lot on the content. We have worked a lot with the elders to collect the content and to represent it in different ways. But then we have looked at the pedagogies. So how do we actually learn indigenous knowledge? So if you go back to the village and have a look how all those children learn in an informal setting. And there's a lot of observation, mentorship, being in real life. All that is not there in school. So taking it taking that knowledge from everyday life and trying to write it as a text in a textbook is decontextualizing it. It's not serving any purpose. It makes no sense from many perspectives. So we are looking at indigenous ways of learning that should be also integrated besides the content. So that's an important element, the content plus the way of learning. And so we have started looking at, we have done a lot of VR, representation of whatever, hunting, dances, different practices.
Yeah.
And then we have done some studies in terms of looking at, can the students learn from the non-player characters in those VRs, and how well does that work? What support do they need? We went back to the community, say, how do you teach it actually? How do you teach that dance? And they're like, yeah, if the child can't do it, we take the child out, the child must observe.
Okay.
And our kids have been very impatient, so they don't observe, they want to participate. So we look at mapping ideas from the communities with forced observation in the VR.
Okay.
So you cannot participate if you didn't observe. So we replicate those ways. So that's very important. The other aspect the communities were saying is, one, they also want the elders to be part of the teaching stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not just what we call the qualified teachers, but the elders themselves.
Okay.
More like also like summer schools. I think they do that in Europe also. Like they teach then in the bush maybe. And the other important thing they kept on mentioning is the cultural practices, like cultural ceremonies. They are not recognized by the school. So the children don't get leave. They only get leave when they are sick.
Okay.
But they don't get leave when they should be part of a ceremony. And so those are important aspects so the whole system should be integrated.
Integrated.
Yeah.
And I believe that you're already working with a school in is it PPS?
Yeah, People's Primary School.
People's Primary School.
Yeah.
Yes. And that brings to my next question, what would be something practical that teachers can actually use, that you would like to see teachers actually use from this experience? I think you're already implementing the VR is within that context.
Yeah, so the whole augmented reality, virtual reality, because it allows the children to have this embodied learning experience, which we want to achieve. And we had a teachers workshop, and they were also very convinced that they could use that at least in their language classes, because all our VR experiences are in the original language. So it is in Chuanxi, or it is, and we can provide different languages. So then the child again learns language in context, and I think that's also really important. Not just translating and house eubu, So it's like the child is engaged in a game, in an embodied experience, and has the language at the same time. So those ones are ready for deployment. So we're just waiting for the ministry to give permission, and then it will go ahead. Yes. And we also started now with the youth. In Songku, we started designing games with augmented reality, having videos and speech and translations also. So there's a lot to be done.
On that point where we were talking about the youth, right? Your work spans youth-focused AI, right? VR storytelling, sustainable energy projects. Can you share one example where this indigenous worldviews shape the solution and not just the packaging?
Yeah, I mean, so we work with everybody. So the main focus were the elders, because they have the knowledge. Then the youth, we bring them in a more playful way, but also from an economical perspective. So what kind of products could they have that makes a living? And the children is much more about the learning. And so I think our best or well-rounded example is really the digital repository that the Obahimbas curated, because we have been working with Ochisa, one of the villages in north of Upur.
Yeah.
And for many years they have collected their own knowledge. Yeah. So they have their content. And they then came here, actually in this very same room. They were sitting here on the floor and going through all these 10 years of footage and deciding which of those parts should the next generation know. So they curated it, and they curated it in a very different way than we would have curated it.
Yeah.
So they created threads of how to raise a child. So when you raise a child, you should be knowing this, and also the interface was very circular. So you see the village, so you kind of walk through the village, and here's the cattle, and that's what you did. Yeah. So they recreated the whole interface and the structure of how to teach what they have collected over the years.
That is so cool.
Now, Prof, I believe at the end of last year or mid last year, there was you had an Indigenous knowledge fair where multiple people, what they call Indigenous tribes coming in through from different parts of the world. Apologies for the terminology. How different are the things that we face here in Namibia as compared to the global,
The other indigenous
indigenous community and groups, and maybe while touching on that, you can maybe just specify 1 or 2, 3 countries maybe where they came from.
Yeah, so I think what was really interesting is, one, they focused a lot on their commonalities. So then they discovered, we also talk this way to the birds. We also have a holy fire. I think the most interesting, we also do intestine readings to do predictions. So the Chileans do the same intestine readings as the Ovayimba do. So we discovered a lot of commonalities, which was really interesting. So they were very united as people. We traveled 2 weeks through Namibia with 50 people.
Sure.
It was very exciting. And then I think what came out a bit then in terms of differences was that the South Americans, so Brazil, Colombia, they have been doing a lot of more active fighting.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, we can help you fight the government. And then we were on our side, and then we said, like, but the government is not our enemy.
Yes.
The government is still us.
Yeah.
So it's a very different structure. So because the government is the same people as the people on the ground, right, in Namibia, but not in other countries.
Okay.
So that was the main difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Prof, do you have any last words for someone who's curious and probably wants to follow in your footsteps one day? Just a curious little girl or boy who wants to end up in this field. Perhaps they're now inspired by the work that you do and how we're integrating indigenous knowledge and technology. What would you tell them? What advice would you leave them with?
Of course, I advertise the cluster, right? So everybody's welcome. So we work across different disciplines, communication people, but also we work with educational psychologists, we work with the architects. So no matter what field one would be in, they would fit our cluster.
Okay.
And everybody's welcome. Also, it doesn't matter at what level. So you don't need to come to the university to be part of our cluster. Again, we work with communities, we work with youth, anybody, so you don't need to have a degree, but if you want a degree, if you want to do a PhD, if you want to become my successor, then somehow the system says you should go through the
academic process.
Yes. But also, most students that go along to the village, they get so hooked and they stay with the cluster because they see the actual need, but also it's beautiful to work with the community.
Right, Prof. Such beautiful insights. I think the work that you do truly for me is inspirational. Perhaps I might just join that class.
Yes, you're welcome.
Because that brings us to the end of yet another episode of Research and Innovation Matters with Nigel and Unda. We'll see you next time.